street, yes.
It's like going to
Yes,
56th
yes,
Street.
yes, yes.
Oh.
It's like the other part. We look, and here it's even wider because the streets were the narrow streets.
What we're switching to, you mentioned last time in the audio, you mentioned an article as an example from a liberal Polish
Yes, but this in Warsaw, the article. It's yes.
But I like that. Maybe
Yes.
we can stay
Okay.
on that.
Okay.
What is the next? Oh, ask about the polls.
Start. The Jewish-Polish relations and the attitude of the Polish population toward the Jews, I would say that time is a complicated one. From one side, okay, we can say that in Poland, in the occupied Poland, the collaboration, the direct collaboration with the Nazis was on a limited scale. In Poland, the Nazis didn't direct and puppet government like in other countries of occupied Poland. In Poland was a large Polish underground which prepared themselves to fight against the Germans. It was a large Polish underground press. But when we speak about Polish-Jewish relations, Poland, we should go back a little to the relations of the Poles to the Jews before the war. The Jews were about 10% of the population in Poland. Poland wanted to get rid of the majority of the Jews. This was the Polish policy between the two world wars to get rid of such large numbers of Jews. And in Poland was a strong anti-Semitism, in spite of the fact that in Poland was also a flourishing Jewish community, religious, political, and cultural life. When under Nazi occupation, I can maybe quote, not exact quote, but to mention what a Polish underground newspaper, and not of the anti-Semitic circles, but quite of the liberal circles, wrote that time during the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. And approximately, I'm not quoting word by word, but they say that we can now hear the shots from the ghetto area. And we are witnessing actually the extermination of the last Jews of Warsaw. And let's ask ourselves honestly whether we regret this situation, whether we are mourning after the Jews or no. For the individual Jew which is exterminated, we think we are sorry about it. And maybe we need to help him. But the very fact of the disappearance of the Jews from our area, for this we are not mourning. I would say this is the basic definition of the Polish attitude of the Jews. Again, I want to mention there were many Poles who helped Jews, righteous among the nations. And we never, I would say that all the Poles, or even we cannot say even all the Germans, were murderers. Even in Germany were righteous among the nations who endangered their life in order to save Jews. And in Poland were also. But I speak about the general attitude. And then going back to Vilna. In Vilna was a big Polish population. In Vilna was a Polish underground, which started its activity when Vilna became Lithuanian in 1930, 1940. It continued its underground under the Soviets and also under the Germans. The Jewish underground in Vilna tried to establish contact with the Polish underground to receive some answer of them, and the answer was a negative answer. The Poles themselves in Vilna, comparing to the Lithuanians, were discriminated by the Lithuanians. Because there was an historical fight about Vilna between the Lithuanians and Poles. In 1918, 1919, 1920, there was a war between Poles and Lithuanians. And for many years between the two world wars, Lithuania, there were no diplomatic relations between them because the Lithuanians saw Vilna as their capital city. So the Poles were discriminated comparing to the Lithuanians. But to say that in Vilna was a large scale of Poles who helped Jews, no, I wouldn't say it. There were some, like in other places, but the majority of the Polish population would define them as bystanders. Very few of them were in the police because actually the Lithuanians opposed that Poles would serve in the Lithuanian police. There were some of them. Let's say, but in Belarus, which was close to Lithuania, among the local police and the Germans in Belarus, were quite a substantial number of Poles, local people who served.
So you would say that the Germans did not use the Poles to exterminate the Jews?
They were not special Polish police units in Lithuania, in Vilna, which carried out extermination of Jews. There were not such. Why? No. But Lithuanian units, in Ponara you can say that there were some Germans, but most of the units of the people who were engaged in direct shooting of the Jews were local Lithuanians who joined the German police or German police battalions. In Poland, the Polish Granatowa Policja, which was in Warsaw, they took part in rounding the Jews, catching Jews, other problems with anti-Jewish activities. But I cannot say that special Polish police units were engaged in killing Jews. No. In the forests, there were Polish partisan units, especially of the Narodowe Siły Zbrojne, which was of the fascist Polish political parties, that they, in the forests, killed quite a substantial number of Jews who escaped into the forests. The Poles, this grouping, saw the Jews in the forest as a pro-Soviet element, and they knew that in the future, after the war, they saw themselves in a dispute with the Soviet Union about the future boundaries between Poland and Soviet Union. When speaking about Polish-Jewish relations, we should mention one more thing. In the 17th of September 1939, the Red Army crossed the Polish border, and according to the agreement among Germany and Soviet Union, almost half of Poland was occupied by the Soviet Union, Western Belarus and Western Ukraine. The Poles saw this act of the Soviet as a step in the back. When they were fighting Germans, the Soviet army entered against them. The Jews welcomed the entrance of the Soviet army in Vilna and other places because we felt that time that the alternative to the Soviet army was the German army, German occupation. And the Jews knew that under the Germans will be much worse for them than under the Soviets. So we greeted the entering Soviet army as an alternative against not the German armies. But the Poles, for them it was a terrible happening. The Soviet army enters when they were fighting the Germans. And when they saw the Jews welcome the Germans, of course this raised more the anti-Semitic feeling against the Jews. And this is one of the subjects we are today in dispute with the Poles about Polish Jewish relations at that time. When I say that the relations are complicated, this is one of the things that complicate these relations. Yes.
And the importance that survival was key. It was always choosing between the lesser of any evils.
Okay. The problem of uprising inside the ghetto or going into the forest with the Jewish underground in Vilna faced this dispute, these possibilities, is also connected with an understanding of the individual Jews in the ghetto. Again, as a young man, that time myself, as a boy of 15, 16, 17, without a family, without being responsible for anybody, for me to escape in the forests, to fight the Germans, it was clear. As a target. From the first day of Nazi occupation, this was I and my friends my age thought about it. But when I think about this decision today, not as a boy of 16, 17, without parents, without nobody, but as a, let's say, as a married man at the age of 25, which lives in Vilna ghetto with a wife, with 2 children. And let's say I'm working on the railway station and I have the shine, which according to this shine, I am a useful worker, and this permits me and my family still to exist in the Vilna ghetto. It's the legal status. After they exterminated many Jews, they left those who were working. And let's say at that time, as a young man, I had the possibility to get arms and escape in the forest and the partisans. But that time it was clear for me, when I am leaving the ghetto in the partisans, my family in the first selections, the Germans from time to time changed the shinim and selected who are the workers they need and whom they don't need. Without the very fact I am working, they will be the first who will be sent to Ponar and will be killed. Even before it, as long as I worked, I was smuggling outside from the ghetto some potatoes, not to die of hunger. We received still some small allotment official because of the work to some food for the family. So even without it, the family maybe would die of hunger without this, the very fact. So when I ask myself today how I would behave if I would be not a youngster of 17, but a man of 20 with a family, I don't think that the heroic act was to escape in the forest and fight, but still to continue to be with the family in ghetto, to work, because people in the ghetto had hopes. They had hopes that maybe something will happen, that they will survive. On what was based this hope? We saw that in 1941, when the German attacked the Soviet Union, within few days, the German army went through hundreds of kilometers inside Soviet Union. So when let's say 1943, when the front line was somewhere close to Vitebsk, few hundred kilometers more to the east, we hoped by one successful breakthrough of the Soviet army, it will bring them within a few days in Vilna, and the Germans will not have time to exterminate us. There were hopes that when the Allied forces will land open the Western Front in France, maybe Germany will immediately capitulate or collapse. There were hopes maybe Hitler will be killed. And there were attempts to kill Hitler. In August of 1944, there was an attempt to kill him. So as long as the ghetto existed, people hoped that some miracle will happen and they will survive. So each day that prolonged the life gave chances of survival. And so when we speak about leaving the ghetto, it depended on such considerations. Uprising in the ghetto, which was planned at the last stage of the ghetto. The underground planned the uprising in the ghetto when the Germans will come to liquidate the ghetto. So in such case, there was no more to lose, so we have to fight, and then that time to try to break through into the forest. In Vilna, didn't happen an uprising in the ghetto. Didn't happen. Because an uprising in the ghetto could happen in a time, a successful uprising, when the people in ghetto knew, understood, were persuaded that the Germans are taking them for extermination. And actually the uprising in Warsaw Ghetto happened when in April 1943 the Germans came, said we are sending you to labor camps. The Jews in Warsaw knew that a year ago 300,000 Jews were taken from Warsaw Ghetto, told they were taken to labor camps and actually taken to Treblinka and Gaza. So when the underground called for uprising, the people joined the underground, didn't obey the Germans' order to leave the ghetto. And that time, in such a situation, the Germans have to go from house to house and to conquer each house and take out the people. In Vilna ghetto, when in September the 1st, the ghetto found himself surrounded in the morning. September 1st, 1943. And the Jewish underground in Vilna called the Jews to join them in an uprising. And the Judenrat said, it's not the liquidation, it's only 5,000 people taken from the ghetto to Estonia for work, not for extermination. The Jews believed, and they didn't join the underground. So the underground understood that there's no future for uprising in the ghetto, and after this case, they decided about leaving the ghetto, and in September, most of the underground members left the ghetto for the forest, and the last group, with Abba Kovner, left the ghetto to the sewers on the 23rd of September, but the ghetto was surrounded already, and again the Jews were told they are taking to work to Estonia and Latvia. And Jews believed that time this, and actually most of those able working Jews were taken that time not to Ponari, not to the death camps, but were sent to Estonia and to Latvia in labor camps. Children and elderly people were taken partly to Ponar and partly to the Sobibor death camp in Poland and exterminated. Yes, we can. I can say it. But okay. Among the youngsters in Israel, there is interest in the Vilna ghetto, mainly I would say connected with the Jewish underground in Vilna ghetto. The youngsters in Israel are very interested about the Jewish resistance movement in occupied Europe, and the very fact that the first underground armed organization was erected in the Vilna ghetto, and the first call for armed resistance, the call not to go like sheep to slaughter, was first time announced in the Vilna ghetto. This raises the interest, and this is because the reason why in many, many schools the chapter which deals with Jewish resistance start with the call for, in Vilna ghetto, not to go like sheep to slaughter and to fight the Germans. And then on the academic level, again the uniqueness of the Jewish Judenrat, of the dispute of the cooperation between the Judenrat and underground which existed in the ghetto, and also about the struggle between both of them. In Vilna ghetto, the Judenrat had connection with the underground. Jens had connections, close connections even with them. He said, even when the day will come time for uprising, I myself will join the uprising. On the same time, there were also disputes, even clashes with the Judenrat. The famous case of Itzhak Wittenberg, when he was arrested, the commander of the underground, which is a unique story, and some other cases. So we can see cooperation and clashes and between the Judenrat and the resistance in the organization ghetto, which gives a unique chapter about this complicated problem of Judenrat and resistance inside the ghetto. Let's say in the Warsaw ghetto there was almost no contact between the underground and the Jewish, the Judenrat in ghetto. They were separate entirely. In Vilna ghetto, even in Bialystok ghetto, there were close contacts, and at the same time there was also a dispute and even sometimes physical encounters inside the ghetto.
Do you have a theory on why that is? You mentioned before also all the different youth movements, and there were many, actually got together in the underground in Vilna and managed to cooperate, even if there were disputes. Do you have any explanation?
I think again that the very fact that in Vilna, the underground was from the very beginning, all the political movements, youth movements, were in the same organization without any differences. This is also, I think, connected with the uniqueness of the Jewish community inside Vilna. The Jewish community in Vilna was an Yiddish community, a Jewish community. It is not, let's say, in Vilna was one of the few places in Poland that the Jewish intelligentsia spoke, walked in the Yiddish or in Hebrew languages. It wasn't like in other places in Polish or in other. the history of Vilna as a political center, this all together, and the combination of the fact that the leaders of the different underground groups, they found a common language that time. They understood immediately. Vilna faced immediately the physical examination. So they knew when we face physical examination, all the other political disputes for the past have no meaning. So this should be left. We are facing a physical examination. We have one enemy. We should be united and fight this enemy. In Warsaw Ghetto, they didn't face beginning extermination. So they continued the political life before it, and they continued during all the war. Later, they established a united organization, but also the small units were still political units. Even in the Warsaw Underground, there were still some fighting groups of the Shomer HaTzair, of the Chalutz, of the others. In Vilna, there was united till the smallest cell of the underground. And I connected with the fact that before the extermination, immediate extermination, they understood the situation as it was, and they understood that the only way is unite themselves against the common enemy and to leave all the disputes after the war for the future. And they actually immediately after the war, the people of the underground, let's say this who were communists, most of them remained in Vilna and took part in the building the new communist Lithuania. There were very few, but still. While the Zionist group immediately started on the underground way to in direction of Eretz Israel. I myself, the day when the war ended, May 48, threw away my Soviet uniform, escaped, and went illegally through whole Europe. And December 45, I was already in a small boat. The British soldiers were drunk. We landed in Eretz Israel at night time and started my new fighting there.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I wanted to ask you two things about that. If you could give a brief sort of historical perspective on the birth of Zionism in Vilna, and then if you want to say any more about your own personal.
Were you a Zionist before?
Yes, I myself, my parents were Zionist. I went into Hebrew school, in Tarbut school. And from the very beginning, as I remember myself, and I started as a youngster to think about my future, I saw my future all the time in Eretz Israel and the future Jewish state in Israel. This was my dream all the time, and in the forest, in the ghetto, with some other people. We spoke only about this. This gave us in some way also some strength, some spiritual strength, that we have some aim in our life, not only to survive, but after the survival, we have some other way. And I would say that even many of my friends, youngsters, who were before the war were ardent Bund youth movement, or even communists, after the Holocaust, after the war, after the encounter and the attitude of the local population toward us, many of them changed their past political attitudes and understood that for us as Jews, after the Holocaust, we cannot build our future on the ruins of our destroyed life, and our future is connected with establishing in our own states, no more to be at the mercy of other people. This was the main lesson that we learned. With all the different attitudes of local people, the main lesson that I myself learned was we have to build a new world, a better world with humanitarian world. Everything is right. But again, not to be dependent on the goodwill of other people. And this made me immediately, the day when Germany capitulated, to escape and to go my way.
Anything else about...
You spoke about the Zionist movement.
Yeah.
Wilna was a Jewish cultural center from the very beginning of it. And Vilna was a strong Jewish, important center of Jewish enlightenment, of the Haskalah movement, which started in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century. which the idea was that to modernize the Jewish life, to go out from the strict Orthodox Jewish society, closed society, and to adapt ourselves, the Jewish life in the diaspora and to the local conditions of the non-Jewish environment. And but in the 1980s, 81, when the big pogroms after the assassination of the Tsar of Russia, Alexander II, when there was a big wave of pogroms, many of the Jewish Haskalah members of the Enlightenment who believed that we still have a future in the places where they live, they understood that it is in the prevailing conditions we cannot. And then the Haskalah movement turned, I would say, in three directions. One direction, which was a small one group, said, okay, we should assimilate themselves, to live our Jewish life, to assimilate themselves, and this is the solution for our problem. But the majority was split among two movements. One movement was that the Zionist movement, which said, we Jews have no future in Europe. Our future should be to renew our sovereignty in Eretz Israel. And this was they started the Chibat Zion movement, which also in Vilna in the 1880, 82, 83, 84, was a large group of them, and some of them left also for Eretz Israel to start the life there. Another part of this Enlightenment movement went in the direction of socialism, said the future of our people is to change the existing regime. In a future socialist society, the Jews will find their place as Jews. And this, the main movement was the Bund movement. So in these directions. So and the Bund was actually created in Vilna. In 1897, the Bund was established in Vilna. But the Zionist movement was very strong also in Vilna. And even such a Zionist religious organization like the Mizrahi in 1902 was created in Vilna, a movement which till today existed, a very strong movement in Israel and the whole Jewish world. In Vilna were Chalutz movement, a very strong Chalutz movement, and with all Jewish political youth movements starting from Shomer HaTzair and Chalutz and Nor HaTzioni and Beitar, and then Hebrew education school, Tarbut Shul, and Hebrew seminar of Hebrew teachers. In the Jewish Community Council, the dominant party were the Zionist parties. In the trade unions, Jewish trade unions, the Bund was the dominating factor, but in the Jewish Kehillah were the Zionists. And it was a very strong Zionist movement till the war. As I mentioned, between the short time, 39, 40, most of the Jewish Zionist leaders from Poland came to Vilna, to independent Lithuania at that time yet, yes. And when the Soviets started the Vilna in 1940, when Vilna became part of Soviet Union, the Zionist movement went into underground. And the Jewish youth movement organized they called it the coordination of the Zionist youth movements. So it was called underground. And actually, this underground under the Soviet period was the nucleus which continued the underground organization under the Germans. So the roots, I would say, of the underground armed resistance which existed in Vilna, which were active in Vilna under Nazi occupation, its roots were the Zionist coordination movement during the Soviet period. But that time the main aim of the Zionist movement under the Soviets in 1940, 41 till it became communist, was to leave Lithuania. And actually by forged documents, by not forged documents, from Lithuania to Sweden, and later to Soviet Union, to Japan or to Turkey, some thousands of Jews succeeded to leave and reach Eretz Israel. Some of them even reached United States, some yeshivas, lived and reached United States. But